Good day from Manila. Welcome to day 5 of the 9th International Skills Forum, Reimagining Education and Skills Development for a New Normal. I'm Mitzi Borromeo. Well, it's closing day already, and we have had quite a storm of knowledge and ideas all week. I call it brain rain, with a brilliant lineup of speakers, a lot to take in, a lot to chew on. I hope you've been getting a lot of inspiration and encouragement to transform education in your respective fields. Now, before we begin the session 5 panel discussion, let's do a quick poll. Would you please take a moment to answer this question? So you'll see on your screens, what is one of the biggest challenges for teacher education or professional development brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic? So you have 4 choices. A is shift to online learning, B, lack of funding, C, lack of institutional support, or D, lack of pedagogical practices. So we'll give you a moment to answer, and I'm seeing here 50% of you are answering shift to online learning. So, and coming in second is lack of funding. Coming in third, lack of pedagogical practices. Last, lack of institutional support. All right, thank you very much for taking time to answer that. And this is a great takeoff point, actually, for our panel discussion on teacher quality and teacher professional development. Some of you may have been thinking, well, it's a combination of all those answers. It is a complex issue after all. And indeed, there are many factors that have contributed to the current learning crisis. And we'll get into that in this panel discussion. In this session, we'll explore relevant issues on teachers' quality and teacher professional development across education subsectors from K-12 to higher education. So we want to ask questions such as, what are the major challenges for traditional teacher education and training systems affecting the quality of teachers? We will also look at the digital readiness of teachers and their transformed role in the new normal. So how can we help ensure that teachers are able to assume their critical role in achieving inclusive quality learning for all? We have 4 experts in this panel who will be sharing perspectives on school education, higher education, and technical and vocational education and training, or TVET. They are Ms. Margarete Sachs-Israel, Chief of UNESCO Bangkok Section for Inclusive Quality Education. We also have Ms. Riia Palmqvist, Counsellor of Education at the Finnish National Agency for Education. We also have Mr. Woonghwan, Director of the Division for University Affairs and Education Policy, Ministry of Education for the Republic of Korea, where he is involved in supporting teacher capacity for university staff. We also have Dato technologist Dr. Mohammad Naim bin Yaakub, Deputy Director of the Malaysian Research Institute for Vocational Education and Training. So this is how this panel will work. I will ask them 2 questions, then we'll have 2 ADB discussants to comment on their presentations. After that, we'll take questions from the audience. So please do note down any questions or comments you may have and submit them on the app, and we'll try to accommodate as many as possible. Okay, so let's move on to our first speaker. Let me call in Margarete. Margarete, you saw some of the answers earlier, right? Looking at challenges during this time of COVID. Now, looking at the Asian success in improving access to education, we know that there are still so many who are marginalized and unserved for reasons that some of them were stated in the multiple choice poll there. What do you think has been the main impact of COVID-19 on teachers, and what are the key factors and approaches for teachers' growth and professional development to ensure access and learning?
Thank you very much, Mitzi. And first of all, I would like to thank the ADB for inviting UNESCO. This is a great honor and pleasure, and I'm looking forward to this session. Let me share my screen with you to give you the presentation. Okay, so what I would like to start by stating once again, even though it has been said obviously already throughout this very important webinar, as we know, the COVID-19 pandemic constitutes the most significant global disruption in education in modern history, and also has deeply impacted teachers. And as we know, it has impacted around 63 million primary and secondary teachers around the world, which were affected by school closures. So as education suddenly changed to distance learning modalities in early 2020, teachers worldwide even in context with adequate infrastructure and connectivity, were largely unprepared for the new distance teaching modalities. This means that digital literacy was very low among students, parents, and also in particular teachers, which are very much at the center of providing the continuity of learning. Now, beyond the lack of technological skills, teachers were also unprepared to teach in an emergency situation, because we can really call this an emergency situation, including content adaptation, managing a class in a remote learning setting, monitoring the learning progress of students, identifying those at risk and providing assistance to those at risk, and importantly, also managing stress, those of the students, but also those of their own. These challenges were even greater in rural areas and in urban deprived areas. Major challenges also included the deepening of inequalities due to a considerable digital divide in terms of connectivity and necessary devices for teaching and learning, not only for students, but also for teachers. Now, overall, the crisis really put the spotlight on pre-existing weaknesses of education systems, including teacher training. Now, therefore, there is a clear recognition overall of a need to rethinking education, rethinking and reforming education systems, is within that really trying to and starting to think about how to reform education and teacher training as well. Now, how did countries respond to the crisis? How did they support teachers during COVID-19? According to the latest finding of a survey that was undertaken by the National Education International Teacher Task Force, while most countries have provided support to teachers in remote learning throughout, many countries have still shown difficulties in reaching all teachers. Here are a few statistics just to give you an idea of where these difficulties lie. Only 25% of LDCs were able to provide access to the internet or devices at subsidized or no cost to teachers and also to students. Only 27% of LDCs and lower middle income countries had a fully operationalized policy on digital learning, which was accompanied by guidance to teachers, compared to half of high-income countries. So here you can already see that there was a disparity, and some countries did not provide any kind of support at all. Now, to us, of particular concern is the limited training and capacity building of teachers to how to adapt their teaching to reach the most vulnerable groups. Because the most vulnerable groups are the ones that were affected the most by the crisis, that were not included, that were not reached because of the digital divide or other difficulties they had, and also groups with special needs who do need also in normal times particular attention and particular type of teaching. Now, there is a global recognition, and I would like to underline that, of the importance not only of teachers at the heart of teaching and learning, but also of the importance to equip them with the digital and pedagogical skills to teach remotely, online, and through blended and hybrid learning. This is a statement which you have in front of you of the last World Teachers' Day. This is a day that happens on the 5th of October every year. So this is a recognition of the global community. Now, what does this require and what does it mean? It requires, first of all, to set up not only short-term guidance and training in ICT, both technically and pedagogically, as an immediate response to the crisis, but importantly, to also integrate these skills in pre-service training to ensure teachers' preparedness for future disruptions and their teaching in the new normal. Because the new normal will mean that we will continue to have hybrid and blending learning and to be able to use digital pedagogies. As schools reopen, teachers also need to be specialized in blended and hybrid teaching methods, because these represent yet another significant change in teaching, and teachers, yet again, are not trained in these. So they need to also be able to assess where students are in their learning after many months, and in some cases, many years of lost learning and school closures, and to be able to then personalize the learning to remediate their learning losses. So there are a number of things that teachers have to learn and be trained in and continuously be supported in. Now, in that sense, what are the competencies that are required for teachers to be effective in teaching in digital environments? So as I mentioned before, they need competencies to be using and integrating ICTs in their pedagogical approaches, but also it requires for them to be able to structure learning in new ways and merge technology appropriately with pedagogy, developing also socially active classrooms, which means to be able to use ICTs to help students become collaborative, problem-solving, creative learners, and continue learning. For many, this will require a different set of skills from those they currently possess. Now, again, in response to this, UNESCO developed the ICT Competency Framework for Teachers as a tool to guide pre- and in-service teacher training and the use of ICTs across the education systems. This framework is intended to be adapted to support national and institutional goals to provide an up-to-date framework for policy development and capacity building in this dynamic area. Now, let me now move to what are the factors and approaches that can help boost teachers' growth, learning, and professional development. Firstly, there are several external and structural factors and conditions that have to be in place in order to enable teachers' growth and innovation. So these are, first of all, access to devices and quality internet, relevant and useful content tailored to distance education, also very concrete examples such as sample lesson plans and resources for teaching and learning in this environment, rewards and incentives, support and vision from school leadership. Is very important that teachers are always supported, already starting with the schools, but also by governments, be it at regional or national level, and continuous monitoring and evaluation. With these conditions in place, there are several innovative approaches that could be considered and encouraged. For example, we've seen that teacher communities of practice and peer learning really work well. We've done studies on this, and we've seen this is what teachers really have said themselves is something that is extremely helpful for them. What also is very useful and has proven to be effective is micro-learning, meaning giving information by digestible bits so that teachers don't have to spend too much time and it is not too complex. That there are interactive, practical, and relevant teacher professional development, that it's not too theoretical, but it's really close to their practice, that it can be tried out in the classroom and with their students. This is an approach that also works together with lectures, activities, and finally, school-based mentoring and learning programs when schools can really act and grow as learning hubs for teachers. The school is considered to be sort of the community for learning and growing together. Finally, I would like to mention, this is really important, that all of this has to be anchored in a clear national policy on teachers and national competency standards for teachers, which I mentioned before that UNESCO developed, which can serve as a national benchmark and a mechanism to prepare, train, support, assess, and motivate teachers to effectively integrate ICTs in the teaching and learning process. Education sector plans and national teacher policies should be developed in a crisis-sensitive lens, which includes preparedness and contingency planning. And once again, as the most vulnerable are the ones that were most affected, a crisis-sensitive teacher policy should importantly include the training of teachers to ensure inclusive learning for all, to recognize the most vulnerable, to recognize their need, to set up particular training, teaching for them, to respond to their needs when they're falling behind, etc., to also communicate with their parents and the community. Last but not least, teachers must be protected when schools reopen. Safety measures, health protection measures have to be in place. But they also need to receive social, emotional support. The situation in which they're teaching is extremely stressful and continues to be stressful. And the status of teachers as a profession should be boosted. Often teachers are working 10 hours, 12 hours a day, yet they're not appropriately recognized. Their salaries have to be protected. As I said, they're at the heart of the education system, but often they're underpaid. So this is something we have to lobby for. And all efforts have to be undertaken to attract the best candidates for the teaching profession. Let me stop here in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. Excellent points. Very important there, what you said. I can't stress enough how what you said about teachers, you know, that we perhaps now, especially in this time of COVID, I was listening to a podcast where they're saying teachers are heroes. We always talk about the frontliners who are the health workers, but at this time, teachers are also in a way frontliners. It is a very difficult time, not just for students, but for them as well. And with this digital divide, there's a lot that we have to adapt to. And I like what you said about this spirit of community. It is so important to really keep this support and what you said about learning and growing together, because with this whole being isolated, we are losing that connection. So very important. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to Riia. Riia, the Finnish example is very interesting. Access to high quality education is one of the cornerstones of Finnish society. It's known for being very inclusive and providing equal opportunities at every level of education. And the Finland model of teacher quality and teacher professional development, the high status, the attractive career path that teachers enjoy, this is well known around the world. But achieving this in the developing world seems to be really difficult. So I'd like to ask you, what would you say is the basic framework? What are the principles that developing countries can at least adapt from the Finland model?
Well, thank you, Mitzi. And first, I'd like to thank EDUFI for having the Finnish National Agency for Education part of this skills forum. And I've collected some of my notes here I'd like to share with you. Wait a second, I have them already here. Okay. Now I think I'm almost there. So first, I'm glad that I can support all the UNESCO's ideas about teachers' quality and what's important in that. First, I would like to highlight the idea that teaching professions should be valued by society. You mentioned that in Finland, we have a very good teacher education, and teacher's profession is very attractive for many people. We have lots of young people who want to become teachers. And of course, it is a master's degree and it's in the university. So young people know that they will get a good academic education. And even that we like to keep them in teaching profession, there are also career paths with that education elsewhere as well. And I think it's one of the points that it is an attractive education in the beginning. And also, we believe, like it was mentioned here, that we want the best people to make the future. So those are the teachers working with young children, and especially also in early education and care. It's also a master's degree in Finland, and we'd like to have the educated, the best quality people working with young children, because we think it's a path. It's like it starts from the early and continues all the way to comprehensive school and for later education as well. So when we have the best people, we also like to keep them there, and there's lots of research about how we need to support the early career of teachers. We have to have like support programs. We introduce the teamwork methods for teachers to like mentor each other and so on, because we know it's a challenging job. It is. We have a very many challenges. We have lots of students who need support in their learning. They might have other things that are influencing their learning at school. The family situations can be very difficult. So these teachers actually need to have very good skills, not only with teaching, but also supporting learning and students' well-being. Like I mentioned, we have our teacher education in universities, and it needs to be well organized. And in Finland, we especially highlight this research-based teacher education. So there's lots of research about how learning happens. So that research needs to be part of the teacher education, so that those teachers know what they are doing. ICT skills and digital competencies are very important. We all learned that during the past 2 years. And I think most of the teachers were ready to do like distance or remote learning, teaching. And of course, those skills weren't learned in one day, but they were learned during the education earlier. We also know that teachers need continuous professional development during all their career. It's not that when they finish or graduate from teacher education, that they would have all the skills needed for life. But all the digital skills, ICT skills, well-being aspects, and so on, all those need to be part of teachers' development. We in Finland, we think that it's a path that it starts from the graduation and continues all those working years for teachers. And also the diversity of teaching staff is important. We have very diversity in our learners, so therefore we also need to have diversity in teaching staff. Minority languages and all kinds of background that can make the school a real learning community that supports not only pupils in their learning, but also teachers in their work. I think these were the highlights I wanted to bring up here, and I'm ready for the questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Riia. Interesting points. Definitely, there are lots of questions coming in. We'll get into that later. I also read somewhere that Finland doesn't put so much importance on grades, but rather on the experience, the learning experience, and really encouraging people to think critically and independently. And that is so important, right, when it comes to learning. Okay, so let's move on now to looking at the Korean model. I'd like to call on Woonghwan and now. I understand that Korea in the past decade has embarked on reforms to update its already successful education system to better prepare students for a fast-changing global economy. And a big part of the success is teacher quality. So I'd like to ask you, what lessons can be learned from the Korean model of supporting university faculty that can be used in developing countries. What do you think should be the role of the government and development organizations like ADB in light of the technological disruptions?
Thank you for me by giving the opportunity to share the experience of South Korea regarding online education. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in the dramatic change in higher education. Likewise, other countries, many higher education institutions in Korea were tasked with moving all teaching and learning into a virtual format. However, there were wide resources gaps or infrastructure gaps among institutions of higher education in capacity for teaching and learning online. So it was necessary for government to fill the gap for all students to have the same opportunities to achieve their goals. So I would like to share the experience of Korea regarding the role of government to narrow the gap among higher education institutions to transition to emergency online learning by building the platform to share learning management system, online contents, and the infrastructure for developing online content, and to provide faculty members with the opportunities to enhance their online teaching competencies based on the project entitled UDEC, UDEC. UDEC is the acronym of University Distance Education Center. The period of this project is 5 years from 2020 to 2025. There are two background reasons to start this project. First is the rapid spread of distance education due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second is distance learning gaps and the rise in demand for the quality improvement in higher education caused by universities' financial conditions or infrastructure. Focusing on creating a leading model for university distance education in the fourth industrial revolution and the post-corona era, this project aims to provide high-quality higher education distance education services through the installation and operation of distance learning centers in the 10 regions in the country. Under the initiative of Korean Ministry of Education, KEDIS, Korea Education Research and Information System Service Agency, Korean Education, and 10 centers have been implementing this project. This slide shows the progress of UDEC project. In September of 2020, the master plan of the project was announced, and in November, 10 regional consortiums composed of higher education institutions were selected as the regional center for this project. From February to March of this year, Korean government and KEDIS examined the project status for the first year and promoted consultation. This slide is the organizational structure of this project. This project is composed of 3 operating tiers. The first tier is KEDIS. It plays as a role of the center for supporting regional centers, developing the measures to improve the quality of online education in higher education institutions, and operating consultative groups for the project. The second tier is the regional university distance education centers. They are located in 10 of the 17 provinces in Korea. The regional university distance education centers play a role to operate and share the public learning management system to build the infrastructure for online education, such as lecture recording studio, and to develop contents and materials for online courses shared by higher education institutions within each region. Furthermore, the centers play a key role to improve the quality of online education for higher education institutions within each region by running education programs for faculty members, focusing on enhancing their online education teaching skills. They also provide a variety of programs regarding copyright or online learning guidelines for increasing the understanding about online education. The third tier is higher education institutions within each region. Based on the support of central and regional UDEC, universities and community colleges use and share infrastructure and content for online learning. This slide shows the role of each organization for UDEC project. Ministry of Education established and managed a master plan for the UDEC project and supported public policies and legal systems relating to online education for higher education. This map shows the location of each regional center for UDEC, and this shows the overview of the first year of UDEC project. The budget for the first year was 12.8 billion won. It is equal to 11 million US dollars. The result and the performance of UDEC project can be categorized into 4 types. First is the support and management for innovating higher education. 10 regional UDEC centers were established as a foundation to innovate teaching and learning in higher education institutions across the nation. Consultative group for regional centers and higher education institutions were organized and began to operate. Also, the project management guidelines were made to support efficient and systematic operation of university distance education centers. Also, consultative group examined project status twice a year and promoted consultation on online education implemented by higher education institutions. Second, by this project, it was possible to build shared learning management system by each region. Learning management system provides several benefits to students and professors, faculty members, to provide unlimited access to e-learning materials and to track learners' progress and performance. Third, this project contributed to building 98 spaces for developing the content, e-learning content of online courses. It is possible to conduct a real-time video lecture with advanced teaching tools. Lastly, 48 contents for online lectures were developed based on the project. Those contents are shared by higher education institutions across the country. This picture shows the performance of UDEC project, and this slide shows the list of contents developed by each centers. Second phase of this project is from April 2021 to February 2022. And during second phase of this project, we will characterize each regional centers and strengthen the cooperation within or among region centers. And the function of each centers will be improved, and we will expand the scope of benefit through public relations for the UDEC centers. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Woonghwan. Wow, that was impressive. Congratulations on that project. Definitely, I'm sure a lot of people would like to ask more specific questions to know more about that. But now let's move on to the field of TVET to find out more about the challenges there. So that's in the field of technical and vocational education and training. I'll move over to Naim now. Naim, as we know, TVET teachers are faced with a dual requirement of being both not only an expert in theory and practice in their domain, but they also have to be adept in domain-specific teaching, planning of lessons, and assessment. So very demanding. I'd like to ask you, how can the Malaysian model of supporting TVET teachers and instructors impart lessons that can be used in other countries? And what do you think what should the role of government and development organizations like ADB be for the future digital economy? Naim?
Yes. Hello, Mitzi.
Yes, we hear you.
Fellow panelists and audience, thank you for the questions. I would like to start by saying what we have in Malaysia. Of course, like other countries, we do have the pre-service training part. And in that part, of course, it involves the subject matter as well as the teaching methodology that we try to infuse to the trainees, to the teacher trainees. That is at the secondary level. Normally, teacher training institutions accept fresh graduates. But for post-secondary level, we actually recruit instructors who have industry experience, at least 4 to 5 years, because it is more important at the post-secondary level that they bring to them experience and technology update and how does the workplace look like to the students. So when they are in service, we do what we call the electronic profiling of them to determine the gaps, the training needs of them between what they need to be and where they are. I will be explaining this a little bit more in the next slides. We also require the TVET instructors to register and be certified in the TVET fields by professional bodies. So if you look at my name, that TS there, I have a professional technologist certification. And when they are in service too, they need to update their competencies with technology certification once every 2 years. And they need to be attached at the industry, at the workplace, once every 2 years for between 3 to 6 months. By the way, before I forget, in terms of the pre-service training for the post-secondary level, we also do require them during trying to be the pre-service, also attachment apart from the schools and colleges, also at the industry and the workplace, so that they have a head start on what's going out there. For the e-profiling, in terms of determining the training needs, there is a competency taxonomy or database that we develop using the National Occupational Skills Standard. We have a curriculum for it as suggested by experienced people, and we come up with an ability map. So the instructors need to self-assess themselves to the internet, which is to be confirmed by their supervisors in terms of what abilities they have and what abilities they need to have. So with that, the gap that we've seen, we can conduct the training. We can implement the training to fulfill the gap. And then after the training, we assess the trainers in terms of them achieving this level of certification and professional recognition. apart from just teaching in the class and having co-curriculum supervision, we also have them produce documents in research and development. It could be in their specialization. It could be in terms of teaching and learning. They have to produce one research study, supervise students' scholarly activities, perhaps a final year project, and write and publish one paper using the findings. And they have to present the papers at least at the institutional level. So we're talking about not only working in the locale, in the schools, but also sharing and trying to also listen from others what is out there in terms of the latest in Tibet. One thing I would like to highlight is that you need to, project your vision at the world or global level. So there is in Tibet the World Skills Competition. So we do require instructors to choose an area and coach a student, whether it's in welding or fashion design or CNC machine, and they will have a certain duration to train this. And this is to give the bring their vision that, we have to be at par with the rest of the world, especially in Tibet areas where we had to have cross-border in terms of exchange of competencies. So what we produce in Malaysia should be able to work anywhere else in the world. For example, in aircraft, maintenance, repair, overhaul, shipbuilding and ship maintenance and so on. So this is one picture of one example of a student achieving a medallion of excellence in one of the world skills competition as a result of this. For the second question about what governments and development organizations can do for the future of the digital economy, as you know, for the current COVID pandemic, countries have reappropriated or reprioritized what they have in terms of financial capacity for helping people who need the retrenched workers, the schools, the teachers that need the help, and so on. So in the near term, I think we have to provide, for example, assistance for students, instructors to purchase devices, to install necessary learning management systems, and so on. So this is where ADB, for example, can come in and negotiate with member countries on what assistance they can provide in terms of loans or grants, for example. In the long term, we need a policy and regulatory coordination for the digitalization. This is where we need to assess the current situation, prioritize what's important, and try to do it in phases, whether it's a 5 or 10-year plan. Because I think the pandemic is just that triggers the long promise and potential of digitalization. So what assistance you can provide in terms of developmental organizations to enhance the digital connectivity and also the physical connectivity, providing broadband or big bandwidth so that good teaching materials can be delivered uninterrupted. And we need to have to bridge the digital divide, because we found out none other during the pandemic, the reality on the ground that some students need to climb on trees just to get the broadband signal. And laptops need to be shared among the family members. Because of the pandemic movement control order, parents and students share a single device. So can you imagine a family of 4? In the daytime, the parents need to use a laptop, but classes are going on for the students and the students are not accessible. But more importantly is we need to transform. This is where ADB, for example, can come and help to transform institutions and systems, because no matter how much aid, financial or expertise you provide, but without the proper institutions to make it effective and efficient, this will be a wasted endeavor. So this is my response, Mitzi, to your questions for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naim. You said it. That's a key word there. Transform. Indeed, that's what we're all trying to do during this time. And the COVID-19 pandemic has certainly exacerbated this digital divide. We are getting a lot of questions related to this this digitization, of education. And in fact, I want to throw a few in now related to that. We have a couple of questions asking, what is your advice for teachers who think they're too old for learning new ICT skills? For them, it's so complicated and stressful. And also a lot of people are saying it's quite expensive, that let me just pull it. A lot of these questions, someone is asking a teacher with as a teacher with low basic salary, how can you enhance your ICT skills if majority of computer applications like Photoshop, Filmora, etc. are not free? So a lot of teachers, even here in the Philippines, are saying that often they have to shell out their money first, and it is quite a struggle. So who would like to take that question, basically addressing these ICT skills? Naim, since Naim or Woonghwan, maybe.
Okay, I think for anything that is less than desired, I think the natural way is to have training. This is very important to let everybody be on the same page. So I think governments, developmental organizations can assist and facilitate schools and teachers to undergo this training to see how it is being done, state of the art and good, best practice that has identified the barriers. Because otherwise, if you try to start from scratch, you are just maybe try to reinvent the wheel. You will just take more time before you can reach that stage. So I believe training is very, very important, and sharing of success stories is another way to go. That's from me, Mitzi.
Thank you, Naim. Indeed, as you said, all of you have talked about continuous learning, and learning is also empowering our teachers. There's an interesting question here, because there's also now this crisis of identity, I suppose, as people grapple with their multiple roles. So someone asks, although preparedness of teachers is critical and of primary importance to continue the teaching learning process under the new normal environment, other players, even if not as important as teachers, but still very important, should not be ignored. So roles like, basically they're saying their preparedness to play their respective roles in the delivery of education is also very important. But other roles for them include, among others, education managers, parents, and society at large. How can they prepare themselves for the new normal? Can I throw this question at Margaret? As you mentioned some of what
thank you very much. I also wanted to sort of link this question to the question that was asked first about the difficulty of course, how much does all of this cost? And what do we do about the poor teachers that do not have the resources, the poor schools that obviously do not have the resources, and also all of the burden being laid on governments that already are in economic recession. And not only do they have to continue education, but they have additional costs with connectivity and providing all what is required in order to upscale the schools in order to have the digital thing. So what I wanted to say here is that this really becomes the responsibility of the society as a whole. And you just mentioned it, Mitzi. We really have to say everybody in every country is responsible to ensure that learning continues. And this, in this particular area, very much involves the private sector, industry, television providers, anybody who has, for example, the possibility of providing free connectivity. So this is the first thing, is to develop alliances with whoever in the society is responsible for platforms, providing platforms for internet content, and that they need to be tapped into. Alliances and partnerships have to be formed. The same thing goes with the big private sector, be it at the global level, Microsoft, etc., PP, but also local ones, in order to really give, for example, non-expensive devices. There are computers that do not cost more than $100 that need to be provided to teachers in rural areas or in urban settings that do not have the resources, in order to enable them to continue teaching. So I think it's really it's starting with advocacy, but also saying this is your responsibility. It's a responsibility of everyone if you want your children to continue learning. It is not just a responsibility of a single teacher, of a single school, or even of the government alone. Thanks.
Well said. Thank you, Margaret. It takes a village, right? The saying that it is so true. Yeah. Everybody has a role to play. Now, we keep getting these questions about the challenges with technology. So I want to ask Woonghwan, and maybe you can share from your experiences at UDEC. There is a question here. What are the key factors and approaches for professional development for teacher and college instructors in Southeast Asian countries? Perhaps you can share your own experiences there from Korea. Equipping teachers, I guess, with these much needed digital skills. Woonghwan?
I think, can you hear?
Yes.
Yes, I think that there is no panacea to find the best way for teachers to gain the digital skills required in the 21st century. In the future society, professors' role is not to deliver information, but rather to run and explore with their students. So I think that in this context, I think that it is very important to create the atmosphere where faculty members and members consider and understand their students' characteristics, preference, or tendency regarding their learning. Based on the consideration of such factors, teachers needed to make their syllabus or teaching plans. Also, I think that it is very important to have the opportunities to communicate and share their experience, knowledge, and information for digital skills for teaching. Many studies shows that professional learning communities, PLC, are very effective for improving professional practices and outcomes. And this model is still valid for equipping teachers with the much needed digital skills. Lastly, I think that it is good to provide a variety of opportunity for teachers to communicate with edutech experts to improve or experience their digital skills.
Thank you very much. And Woonghwan, it's interesting also with the UDEC project that regional participation. I think it was also very important to consider the different needs of each area. So same thing with developing countries. There's no one silver bullet approach, right? It's important to listen to and assess the needs of each area. Riia, I'd like to go over to you. There is a question here related to the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, we can't forget these very ambitious goals. Sometimes it's hard to just see how we can even get there with all the crises before us. Of course, the climate crisis, now the pandemic. Someone asks here, how are the SDGs integrated in teaching in Finland, perhaps in textbooks or in class activities and beyond?
I know. I'm so excited when I get to talk about our national core curriculum, which I'm very proud of. All those goals have been written in there. They are either in subjects or they are in our transversal skills, which are included in each subject. And you might know that the Finnish teachers have a very wide autonomy to choose how they teach and what materials they use, and so on. But the guidance is given in our national curriculum, which they then make their own local curriculums, and even the schools might have some specific things that they have written in their local curriculums. So the national curriculum takes care that those are in everyday life of all Finnish students at schools. But you are right, they are very important. At the moment, we also have been financing some coordinators for schools, like taking special care of these different projects, for example, about the environment and climate change and so on. So it's like number one priority in Finland at the moment. And I also like to add about the ICT that spring 2020 was very difficult for all of us because we had to close our schools as well. And many teachers felt like they were thrown in the water and they were asked to swim with ICT and those competencies because they had no experience of distant teaching, for example. But afterwards, I've heard many positive feedback about how they had to learn to do it. And even some of the older teachers also felt that that was the time that they actually learned how to use the computers better and more effectively. And I even heard a rumor that some teachers decided to stay a few more years in teaching because they had learned so many new skills. So it was horrible, but there were some good things that came out of it as well.
Excellent. That's nice to hear. Because there was a question earlier about how older teachers tend to resign because of the difficulty in having to adjust or learn new skills, such as dealing with various digital tools. Thanks for that. Definitely a lot to be proud of in Finland, starting them early. That's why Scandinavia brings out people like Greta Thunberg, I suppose, starting them early and understanding things like this. Now, we'll answer more questions later on, but let's move on to some comments or questions from our ADB directors. I will call first on Mr. Samir Khatiwada, Social Sector Specialist from the Southeast Asia Department of ADB.
Thank you, Mitzi, for this very exciting panel discussion. It's really, this is music to my ears. When I look back at this week, when we go back to the keynote given by Minister Naim, and he talked about teacher training efforts in Indonesia. And yesterday, the keynote speech by Malabika Sarkar from Asaka University, who also underscored the importance of teaching and teachers. And to this panel discussion this morning, this afternoon, it's really exciting. And one of the things that a couple of things that I wanted to point out, and listening to all the speakers, and the examples from Finland and Korea and Malaysia, and the sort of the agenda setting from Margaret, there's a couple of things that I kind of wanted to pick up on. One is, if you look at the adult ICT skills across low-income countries, it's relatively low. So the last survey I looked at from ITU Geneva, it shows that less than 10% of folks have ever sent an email with an attachment. Right, so you're working in that type of environment where teachers are no different. They're from that same country where most adults don't know how to use basic IT skills. They don't have basic IT skills. So how do we address that to continue learning has been one of the biggest challenges in the last 18 months living through this pandemic. So that's one, and everybody touched upon the issue of connectivity and access to devices. This is key going forward, especially if anything we have learned from this is how do we make sure that access to education, access to learning opportunities is equitable when we are faced with a crisis like this, right? So, and countries are making an effort in sort of addressing the lack of good ICT infrastructure and IT skills among teachers and educators across the board. That's one. The other one is, one thing is also important when we talk about use of technology and moving to sort of online platforms, virtual platforms, is that we need to meet teachers where they are. We can't come up with, let's give them computers or let's give them that device. We got to meet them where they are. And one example I can give you is from Indonesia, is that there was a survey done outside of Jakarta, that when we looked at teachers, which device that they felt most comfortable with, as it turns out, it's a mobile phone. It's not a computer, it's not a Mac or a PC, it's a mobile phone. So how can we meet them where they are? But what I mean by that is, can we develop tools that could be used on a mobile platform so that they can improve their teaching and students can learn from them? So that's one thing we need to sort of also keep in mind. We need to meet them where they are. And the other example I can give you is, this is from India, is that it's a basic technology. That text messaging is so simple. It's existed for a long time, at least more than the internet. So when you look at text messaging, as it turns out, when you send parents text messages right before dinner time to remind their kids to do homework, as it turns out, that has a huge impact on their test scores and learning outcomes down the road. Right? So it's a great idea. So text message at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. right before dinner time. Again, so this is another example where a little intervention like that goes a long way. And I just wanted to give a couple of examples that we are supporting in Southeast Asia. One is in Indonesia. We're supporting this teacher training initiative that has been launched, very, very ambitious and an exciting project where basically it's selecting teachers from all across the country and enabling them to become better teachers, and also using using their sort of best practices and sharing their ideas, as Minister Naim mentioned earlier this week. That's one example that we're working on. We're supporting, ADB has been supporting. The other one is with TESDA, with TVET. So Dr. Naim mentioned what they're doing in Malaysia, and it's really some of the things that he mentioned is very interesting, and I hope we can do some of that in the Philippines as well, because TESDA has been working in this space for a long time, and we are trying to support them to sort of how can we go beyond what we have been doing in terms of role of publicly provided training? How can we make it more effective in terms of meeting where the labor demand is, right? How can we make sure that the supply of training sort of gets closer to the demand for labor, given the changing technologies, given the sort of the changing landscape of the economy? So I'll leave it at this, Mitzi. I think we can answer questions, but I just wanted to put these couple of thoughts out there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samir. You put a lot of interesting points there, and definitely we need the Philippine government, yes, to level up also and address some of those points you mentioned. Let me call now on Asako Maruyama, Senior Educational Specialist at ADB.
Thank you, Mitzi. And I'd like to, first of all, thank all the panelists for sharing their own view, perspective of teacher education, teacher professional development. And I'd like to highlight several points from the panelists' presentation, as well as from my own view, maybe which is more toward policymakers, to think about professional development in the post-COVID world. And then let me start with the joint statement on the World Teacher Day that Margaret mentioned. I think this is a very good starting point to think about teacher professional development in the post-COVID world, because that statement really captures well the range of skills a teacher would need, for instance, digital and pedagogy skills to teach remotely or online or through blended learning or hybrid learning, and in a high-tech, low-tech, and no-tech environment. And I also like the points that Margaret made in terms of the diverse professional development activities that flourished during the COVID pandemic. For instance, teacher collaboration, peer learning, micro learning, and also the school-based mentorships. And I think these activities will be more mainstream as teacher professional development activities going forward. And then also when we think about teacher education, I think it's really important to think about teacher education as a whole, as a system. In this regard, I think Riia indicated that there is something in between the pre-service and also a pre-service education and the in-service professional development that is about the support for early career teachers. And I think this is a very important point to highlight. And also she mentioned some research-based teacher education, so that a teacher, once they are in school, they can continue doing research and learning by doing. And also she mentioned the important facts that professional development needs to be structured and regularly conducted in line with a career progression structure. I think that really highlights the importance of more systematic thinking about teacher education. And I think that was also highlighted by Margaret, referring to the teacher policy or teacher competency, etc. And I think the similar idea was also mentioned by Naim. But then what is really inspiring about Naim's, the Malaysian teacher development system is the use of technology to, for instance, profile teachers online and certify and professionally recognize teachers' competency, which is obviously connected to the career progression as well. And in addition to that, use the data of the teacher profile to identify training needs. I think this is really a good way to manage the whole process of teacher professional development. And this can also be applied to teacher development in primary and secondary education as well. And university distance education center is also a very fantastic example to use technology to increase to respond to increasing demands for digital education learning resources across universities, especially during the COVID, but then maybe beyond. And I think that also indicated changes in teaching and learning strategies that teacher can use. For instance, using those recorded lecture as a material for students to study before the class. And in the class, teacher may do something different, more interactive with students, like discussions. And then that also indicate, and then also I think one indicated also changes in the role of teachers that many panelists also indicated. And regarding that change in the role of teachers, I think the COVID pandemic further contributed to it. For instance, during the COVID, teachers are required to provide social emotional support to students, or to collaborate with other teachers, or collaborate with parents, communities, and schools that many mentioned. And probably these competencies were not emphasized enough in the teacher professional development before, and this probably needs to be emphasized. And then also the COVID pandemic contributed rather negatively to greater disparities in students' learning levels. And that is partly because of the distance created between teachers and students by remote learning environments. But I think even before the pandemic, some teachers may not have been well prepared to address individual needs of students learning at different levels. And I think in the post-COVID world, we can learn from these experiences to really strengthen these teacher professional development activities. So I just stop here, and thank you very much. And over to you, Mitzi.
Thank you very much, Asako. Very good points there. Bringing up the importance of addressing this with a holistic approach. There's so many problems here, and I guess one of the things we're also seeing, which someone mentioned in Monday, apart from all the academic learnings, one of their panelists mentioned the importance of play. So looking also at, I guess, a mix. We cannot put now with online learning. Parents are even engaged in the kids learning, everything is all about looking at your gadgets and learning. So we also have to look at other avenues for learning. I think they do this in Finland, also focusing on learning experiences, not just in the classroom setting. In fact, one of the projects I'm involved in now, which is an educational TV show in the Philippines called Mind School, because a large amount of the population have no access to the internet. We wanted to bring education through television, which more of the masses have access to. So I want to bring some questions here for our panelists. One of the questions here has to do with this challenge of digital technology. The question is, if learning will be fully digitized, shouldn't student readiness be a primary concern? Teachers can cope, but not all learners will be able to adapt to the situation. This will not only go back to the initial problem of a digital divide community. This will only go back to the initial problem of a digital divide community, not to mention that students have different learning paces and learning capacities. What would be the appropriate approach to addressing learning equality and equity? Who would like to take this question? And I guess in relation to that, let me add this because it's related. How can we continue to transfer learning to students using different platforms if we lack financial support, for example, from government or the Department of Education? Who would like to take this question? Margaret? Shall I throw it to Margaret, or anyone is free to take this question?
Sure. I mean, I can start. I mean, I think, first of all, I mean, as we've seen, if you look at the different analysis of what kind of remote or distance education was provided, it wasn't all digital. And reference was made to this by the speakers before. Because simply students do not have computers, do not have connectivity, and for quite a number of years it will continue to be like this, even though now the attention of the world is about providing connectivity and computers. It is extremely costly and it will take time. But at the same time, we have to act now, and we have to also prepare for the future. Now, what we've seen, what countries have done is a mix of different provisions. So that includes television, it includes radio, it includes, and that was mentioned by Samir, texting, telephones, that work quite well, but it's often in combination. It's a combination of also hand delivering written materials, which were then backed up by, let's say, text messaging from teachers. Often there's an experience, I think in Indonesia, is sort of recordings by teachers that provided the lesson in speaking to their students, so they could hear the teacher's voice. So the students would have the text, but at the same time they could listen to their teachers by just simply listening to a recording. So that is sort of a low-tech type of response to how to continue teaching. And this is something that will most probably continue in the future, because, as I said, students will not just get computers immediately. And even if we move to a blended learning, there is a really massive recuperation of learning, of lost learning, that will have to take place. We haven't spoken about that, but teachers really have to be prepared about that. They have to be prepared to identify where students are right now and to be able to support them in recuperating what they haven't learned in the past months. And again, they will have to be able to reach the most vulnerable, the ones that do not have access, and that will be a major challenge. And they will need to use a variety of tools and not just ICTs. So that's from me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I want to share, this is somebody just sharing their experience, I guess, and related to this fear of learning new technological skills. This person shared, I just concluded a teacher training program for 3 months and conducted it using the free Zoom platform. I mostly had old teacher trainees as trainees. What I did was to train them on ICT skills for 3 weeks, ensuring that they can use at least a mobile set for interacting and training activities. And while away at home, we had problems to 20% of the trainees to connect and or submit their assignments. But the latter 95% of them were well conversant with the system. So I guess it's a matter of getting used to. Now, this question here is very common. It's to do with finances, lack of access to resources. Hazrat Hussein asks, there is a need for a global drive for ICT embedding into the learning fabric. It should come not only with technical assistance, but at the same time with extended financial support, plus matching funds for its sustainability. Comments on this? And in relation to that, I'll add this question because you can address these two as well. How can governments, where is that question? I just lost it, sorry. It was a question relating to government. What can governments do to provide better support for this? And also other institutes like ADB. So who would like to take that question? Would anyone, we can also have, Naim, would you like to take that? Or maybe share from how you, or even Woonghwan, to talk about how you may have addressed problems with finance or getting resources for your project.
Yes, yeah, I can take that in terms of trying to facilitate, the needs of the teachers and the students. In Malaysia's case, for example, the government has really taken the effort to subsidize the purchase of laptops, for example. Also, a very, a discounted rate for your broadband monthly, whether it is prepaid or postpaid. These are real efforts to ease the financial burden, and also laptop loans, computer loans, and all these. Trying to reprioritize the budget for some projects that can be deferred. The governments have in their reserves this budget, so they just defer what is nice to have, but now is what must have. So they need to reprioritize. This is what in Malaysia's case we reprioritize for the immediate need of the parents and students, especially in education, because schools, through the movement control order, have been closed for months, and national exams have been deferred for 6 months to a year. So, we are fearing that we have a lost generation and a lost year. So I think what needs financial assistance? The only way to provide them is to financial assistance. In terms of training, we can adopt a training of trainers approach. If you don't have enough resources to train all teachers, then train a group of teachers, which will then train another group of teachers, and this snowball effect will happen. The other one I would like to mention is about where we are concerned about teachers, and someone just asked about students. How about the parents? The parents at home, especially for the primary and secondary school students, they need to be kind of inducted into this long distance online learning. So I think the Parent Teachers Association have a role there, to try to bring all parents and try to have a knack of what's going on, trying to also provide psychological support to their children. And in these times of online learning, there are also some nasty comments from parents to say that teachers are not doing anything; they are just sharing YouTube, content instead of developing their own content. But in this kind of emergency, I think you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's very good content out there. You can always share whatever that has been existed. So that's Mitzi, my take on that.
Well said, Naim, exactly. I'm glad you brought up that point because it's very easy to criticize, but parents are struggling. I know of some groups here in the Philippines, they actually have a parent support group because they struggle with this new role they've taken on. Now, let me call in Samir. The question here is related to the question I was asking earlier. This is the exact question. How can ADB support and help the educators, especially in the Philippines, in developing their skills even after the pandemic? So that's an additional question.
Thank you, Mitzi. On the question of resources, the financing issue always comes up, of course. And I think I liked what Dr. Naim just said. It's about finding, sort of reprioritizing your spending. It's about being smart about where we spend our money. When you look at if you look at the spending on education sector across our countries, it's not a small amount. It's a huge amount of resources that goes into education. You talk about primary, secondary, higher education, TVET. Really, of course, there's differences between countries, but a lot of resources go into it. But I think going forward, what we do need to do is we need to be smart about how we spend these resources, right? Now, knowing what we know in the last year and a half, let's change the way we spend within the sector. And that has to be sort of the approach, I think. And, technology will be part of our classrooms, either in the primary schools or higher ed or TVET. It's going to be increasingly more, it will be part of our classrooms. And that's going to be the reality. So how do we adjust to that? It's important. I think what ADB has been doing, at least in some of our member countries in Southeast Asia, is that we are working with governments precisely in this aspect. How can we incorporate technology, the ones that have been tried and tested, into improving learning outcomes, not just at primary, secondary level, but also at TVET and higher education level. And I think, I want to point this out. I think Margaret highlighted this very well. Thank you for bringing up the learnings lost, Margaret, because this is something that I care deeply about. And I think we talk about this a lot, is that the cost of learning loss is very high for countries like Indonesia, Philippines going forward. So how do teachers cope with this when finally kids are back in the classroom? So there will be learning loss, and if anything we know from looking at the evidence from across the world, that there is usually learning loss during summer when kids are at home, right? So imagine now, like 6 months, 9 months, a year, they're not in school. So how do teachers cope with this? And this is another area we need to really work on, because we need to address that. They need to actually address that and face the reality that technology is increasingly used in classrooms. I will leave it at that. Mitzi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Samir. I want to read out a comment that someone shared here saying, I totally agree with one of the opinions or questions raised. What I have observed when we are not allowed yet by our government to have the face-to-face learning, teachers were offered a lot of webinars, trainings, or workshops, but some of the teachers did not take those webinars seriously. They should put on the application whatever they learned from webinars, especially when it comes to ICT. I believe at the end of the day, it still lies or depends on the mindset, attitude of a teacher. Definitely, that is very important, changing mindsets. And someone mentioned, I think also Naim and Margaret mentioned, our mental health definitely is also suffering in these times. Now, from there, I'd like to ask this question. Some people here raised, what are your thoughts about academic ease for teachers and for teachers and learners in this time of the pandemic? Do you think accessible digital materials and accessible platforms must be pushed to provide equality in education? Shall I call on Riia for this?
Sure. So could you please repeat the question?
Okay, sorry, I'll say that again. What are your thoughts about academic ease for teachers and learners in the time of the pandemic?
Well, First, I would like to say that it's been quite a year, as we all know, and I hope that we are going towards better future. But I think also that we've learned a lot. And in Finland, we have a very good teacher education, and they already have great skills. So I think I'd like to say that we survived quite well if we talk about teaching. But if we talk about the other things like social issues or like health issues and stuff, because we've been taking a lot of care of student well-being at schools as well. So that's something that we are really worried at the moment. So of course, we all know we believe in lifelong learning. We think that we can catch up with those academic skills. But how about the well-being, the friendship, the support that those who are in need would have needed during past year and a half and so on. We luckily got schools going quite well. We had the little children were able to go to school almost all year because we wanted to take that risk, kind of like keeping them in the system, because with those especially in need and in support, we wanted to keep them. But otherwise, there are a lot. We learned a lot, and I think we all can agree on that. But and then there might be different times coming up, and we are better prepared for those. I believe in learning. Learning is important, but well-being is even more important.
Well, exactly, well-being, and I think that's something also we're all appreciating and realizing more in this pandemic. I'd like to throw we only have time for a few last questions. One here for Woonghwan, because you talked about shared content in the UDEC project. The question is, do you think accessible digital materials and accessible platforms must be pushed to provide equality in education? Perhaps you could talk about how you share this content to make it accessible to all, to more people. Woonghwan? Do we have Woonghwan here? I think, Woonghwan, did you hear that? That was for you. Did you hear the question? The question is, do you think accessible digital materials and accessible platforms must be pushed to provide equality in education? I ask you because in the UDEC project you talked about shared content. So maybe you can comment on this or talk a little bit about this.
The purpose of UDEC project is to reduce the imbalance between rich students and poor students in terms of accessing digital skills or digital materials in education. So I think that it is very thorough. It is very important project, and it is very valid and effective to reduce the gap in terms of infrastructure and educational access in pandemic period. And considering the serious situation caused by COVID-19 pandemic, it is important. The role of government is important to reduce the inequality or inequality in terms of public education. So I think that it is very important, the role of government.
Thank you very much, Woonghwan. I think we have time for just one last question. So we have here. There is I'll ask one last question, and anyone is free to take this on. What are intervention programs for the teacher or lack of learning of ICT skills in the new learning approach? And this is connected. I'll just connect it here. There is a need for a global drive for ICT embedding into the learning into the learning fabric. It should not. It's more of a comment. It should come not only with technical assistance, but at the same time with extended financial support. I'm sorry I asked that earlier. So let me just stick to this last question. What are the intervention programs for the teacher or of lack of learning of ICT skills in the new learning approach? Who would like to take that? So this is more in the ICT approach. Maybe that's in TVET, I guess. And Naim, would you like to take that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I mentioned it before. You have to provide a proper training, training, and you have to partner teachers that have done this successfully with the one who are considered novice, because even pre-pandemic era, there are already teachers who came on board in terms of providing teaching online. So it's about learning from their peers. This will be, I think, readily doable. So I would suggest, peer learning will be one method that we can use. Yes, Mitzi?
Thank you very much, Naim. All right, so I think I'd just like to go around, perhaps one very brief to ask each one of you, as we move into this new normal, what is your vision? I guess a goal, if you can describe in 1 or 2 words the goal for the post-COVID world of teacher training, teacher professional development. If you can just describe a value or a goal, a vision for that as we enter a post-COVID world in this new normal. 1 or 2 words, Margaret?
Yeah, I think it is important to move beyond the emergency and the crisis. We've been talking a lot about that, and obviously it's very important to be able to address it and also to train teachers to be prepared for future crises and be ready to tackle disruptions. At the same time, as was said often, we have to use this opportunity to reform teacher training. The crisis has put a spotlight on the weaknesses of the system, so we need to take this opportunity and reform education systems and teacher training. That includes really ensuring that teachers are more flexible, that are able to adapt contents, the curriculum and the way of teaching, depending on the context, as was shown, is already happening in the Finnish model. I think that's a very good example to be taken overall regionally, and to ensure that education becomes more inclusive. And lastly, to really be ready to teach at the right level and to focus on those that are lagging behind. That's for me. Thank you.
You summarize it all, Margaret. I just meant really 2 words because we lack time.
Sorry.
Maybe for the others, I'll just leave very briefly. Riia, maybe it's more just a vision or a description of what you'd like to see in this post-COVID world.
If there's will, there's a way.
Nice. Yes, well said.
That would be equality through digitalization.
Good tagline. And Woonghwan, you're on mute. Woonghwan, you're the last. If you could just describe in a word or 2 what you'd like to see for teacher training and development in a post-COVID world.
It is difficult for me to describe, but I think that the pandemic provides the opportunity to totally change our education, and we need to predict and prepare for future education. It is totally different from current education system, and future education will be the hybrid of online and offline education, and the teachers needed to prepare for such changes, and they needed to more opportunity to improve their teaching quality and the future for teaching. That's right.
Thank you very much. Well, there you go. You all summarized it very nicely in your last words. I think what I got from this session really is you all talked about this digital divide, and we addressed, definitely, you all explained very clearly what the crisis is, but you also talked about this great opportunity in crisis to transform. I was taking note of a lot of words that you all kept saying. I guess looking at this word cloud in my head, we heard a lot of words like integration, connectivity, accessibility, inclusivity, change, reform. That's all very much needed. But a big thing that we really need to focus on is connection. And you all talked about it, not just connection in terms of internet connection and getting access to our digital, digitization, but connecting in a human way, because we're seeing also AI on the rise, more apps, but there is no, I guess, replacement for that human connection. And you talked about this also through support systems. And I liked what Margaret said earlier, also the importance of school-based mentoring and learning. We are losing this mentorship, I think, especially in developing countries. There is so much focus on the individual that sometimes there is no connection with I guess, those who come before us. And we're hearing this term, I loved it. Someone told me recently about these human libraries where people are connecting not just through books, but we borrow people to share expertise and talk to one another, even if it has to be from a distance. So I think what you've all stressed is this importance of transforming at this time. And as a teacher, that's the role of a teacher, I suppose, to transform your students, right? So we continue to develop our skills and get this inspiration in as many ways as we can. And we are adapting so that not only do we transform ourselves, but hopefully the students. So I hope you've all been inspired by our panelists. They've shared many interesting points, ideas, a lot to absorb there. So thanks again to our panel members, Margaret, Sachs-Israel, Riia, Palmqvist, Woonghwan, Anne, and Naim bin Yaakub, and also to our ADB sector specialists, Samir, Khatiwada, and Asako Maruyama. Thank you very much for all.